Hello everyone, this is once again Nystagmus here with another episode of Better Know a Leader. Today we take a look at Basil II of the Byzantine Empire. Basil was the emperor of Byzantium until 1025. Under his reign, the empire reached its zenith in the Middle Ages. Before we get into the particulars of Basil II, I wanted to take an opportunity to discuss the origin of the term Byzantine in Byzantium as an empire. In truth, the people who lived in the empire while it existed did not call themselves Byzantine. This is something that came much later as an arbitrary line to delineate between the Roman Empire of antiquity and the eastern part of that empire in the Middle Ages. To the people living there until the fall of Constantinople in 1453, they were Roman, and their empire was related to and connected to the Roman Empire of Augustus and Trajan. The Roman Empire casts a wide shadow over the history of Europe, and it is tempting to see the period as a continuous period of stability until the fall of Rome, usually given as 476 CE. In truth, much like any society, nothing is stagnant. The Roman Empire in 100 CE had extraordinarily little in common with the later Roman Empire in the 4th century, after it converted to Christianity, much like how different modern-day Canada or the United States is with their 19th century counterparts. Perhaps in the future I will do a video more focused on the history of the Roman Empire. It is quite interesting while at the same time having a lot of simplistic myths on how the empire fell. Spoiler, it was not aliens. Which, in the context of the Eastern Roman Empire that persisted for another 1,000 years, past 476, this date appears rather arbitrary. Okay, so back to Basil II. His rise to the position of emperor is kind of like something out of Game of Thrones. He was born in 958 and was son of the Emperor Romanus II. He was co-emperor with his father from 960 to 963, and co-emperor with Nicephorus II from 963 to 969, and with John I from 969 to 976. The reason for so many co-emperors? Well, his father died at the age of 26, usually his alcoholism and his sexual appetites are to blame for this, or he was poisoned by his wife. Nicephorus II was a general under the emperor, and he marched on Constantinople and proclaimed himself the emperor at the urging of his nephew John. He then married the dead emperor's wife, Theophano. John then came to power by assassinating his uncle, and he was also having an affair with the emperors who plotted with him. John I died suddenly in 976, and Basil II ascended to the role of senior emperor, as he was now 18 at the time. Yes, it appears that the Byzantine Empire inherited the same issues of succession as the Roman Empire had, which almost always resulted in a civil war after an emperor died, which is what happened in the early days of Basil's rule. However, he solidified his position by 989. It is of note that he was only able to do this with the assistance of Vladimir I of Kiev, who sent a contingent of 6,000 men that would form an elite unit called the Varangian Guard. This unit is actually something I thought the developers would use as a unique unit in the game, however they chose to go with the Togma. The main reason for the stabilization of the empire under his rule is probably because he ruled for an additional 36 years until 1025. Predictably, the gains he made were quickly lost soon after his death. Basil II's most prolific campaign was against Samuel of Bulgaria. Between 1014 and 1018, Basil launched a concerted effort to crush Bulgarian resistance. Basil II's reputation is most villainous in this. His cruelty was at its height after the Battle of Kieran. The Byzantine army captured 15,000 prisoners. It was said that he blinded 99 out of every 100 men, leaving one with a single eye in each cohort to lead the rest back to their ruler. Samuel was struck down by the sight of his blinded army and died shortly after. By the time of his death in 1025, the empire stretched from the southern Italy to the Caucasus and from the Danube to the Levant, which was the greatest territorial extent since the Muslim conquests 4 centuries earlier. This is likely the origin for his leader ability in the game, which allows for easy conquest of cities. He was an excellent general and was able to successfully take territory for the empire. Another area that Basil II excelled in was administration. Whereas many rulers during times of war routinely empty the treasury of the kingdom or empire, looking at you, Caligula, Basil was able to raise revenue and left the treasury full at the end of his reign. Basil also launched a ruthless war on the aristocrats and levied specific taxes on wealthy landowners. This allowed him to amass 90 tons of gold for the imperial treasury. To put this into context, that would be worth about $128 billion in today's money. The current US gold reserves are worth approximately $388 billion. Basil was also successful against his rivals to the east. He was able to repel a Fatimid invasion in the year 1000 and signed a 10-year truce with them. Upon his death, Basil never married and left no apparent heirs. Succession crises and the fact that none of his successors were as capable as him meant that many of his territorial achievements were undone in less than a century. Other aspects of the Byzantine Empire in Civ 6 include its specialty district, the Hippodrome. This comes back from Roman times and was initially built in the 3rd century CE and made more grandiose in the 4th century by Emperor Constantine. It was used for chariot racing, and that is likely the reason the structure grants a free cavalry unit upon completion. Many Roman cities had such structures, but the one in Constantinople was the grandest, with a purported seating capacity of over 60,000. The civilization ability, taxis, probably stems from the empire's view as a vanguard of Christianity. Constantinople was regarded as Rome II after the split with the Catholic Church and the dissolution of the Western Roman Empire. The Byzantine Empire did act as a buffer to the Islamic conquest in the 7th century onward. Basil II's military alliance with Kiev, and by extension Moscow, led to the Russians also taking up the mantle of defender of the Christian faith, even some referring to Moscow as Rome III after the fall of the Byzantine Empire. Finally, we have the feared dromon. This was the core of the Byzantine fleet, however, was not significantly different in design as other ships of its day. What made it feared was the use of the Byzantine Greek fire, which was an incendiary weapon used to light enemy ships on fire. While other empires used similar weapons, the Byzantines were able to use it in a pressurized nozzle to project a liquid that resembled the use of a modern flamethrower. It must be noted that the use of the term Greek fire was by Latin crusaders. The Byzantines used the term Roman fire. The weapon is credited with literally saving the empire from defeat in the first and second Arab sieges in the 7th and 8th centuries, respectively. Well, that is all for today's episode of Better Know a Leader. As always, feel free to join our Discord if you want to help select the next leader in the series, and don't forget to subscribe. Join us on Sundays for the TheCivShow games and Thursdays for the TheCivShow podcasts. Until next time.